this moment in front of you feels a lot like the very first time I met Steve Jobs. It was somewhat daunting and somewhat exhilarating at the same time. Now, I wish I could tell you that the story went really well and the meeting was highly successful, but it was not. In fact, the very first words that Steve Jobs said to me was a swear word. And I'm going to tell you what it is. The reason that he had come back from the Exodus was to save Apple. That was his job. My job in that moment was to present the entire business review of my product team. And so there was a lot riding on that particular moment. And behind me, on some really big slides, sort of like what might be behind me right now, was something that said channel manager or channel development manager. And so the very first words that Steve Jobs says to me was not hi or moi. It was not, hey, how do you say your name? Which I would have hoped he might have wanted to know, because I was sort of hoping to impress him right about then, which, by the way, is Nilofer. No, these were the very first words that Steve Jobs said to me, and I apologize for the vernacular. But his words are so instructive for how business is going to work today that I'm going to go ahead and use his language. So remember, the slide says channel manager, and Steve Jobs' first words to me were, fuck the channel. And I looked over my team that had been, we had been working for weeks to get our action plan together. And so I looked over at them sort of like in the corner, like, what do I do now? And they looked back equally like, back. And so I proceeded on, hoping that somehow magic would happen and I would impress him. But it didn't really seem to sway him at all, what it was that we presented. The reason I was the one pulling together this business plan, I was all of 20-something years old, it was 1997, was that the product team I had been in charge of had grown from $2 million to $180 million in 18 months. It was by far the most profitable part of the company at the time. Every other product line was declining, both in revenues and in profit, and ours was growing in both. So I expected the moment to be, good, but not so much. And in fact, I ended up finishing the presentation sort of like, I'll say it as assuredly as I possibly can, and then run out of the room and hope somehow it will get better. In fact, I actually went back to my office and typed a little note back to someone who had offered me a job somewhere else. Because I was like, yes, that does seem like a very good idea right now. And about a year later, I ran into the colleague who had taken over my role. And I expected to offer condolences, like, oh, you must have gotten a new job, or you must be looking for a new job, and how can I help? And instead, he said, actually, we're doing great. We're doing everything that you set out in the plan. It's going fantastically. And here's where I learned that leaders need to hold two things as true. They need to both run towards the future and figure out how to let us let go of what we're currently doing well, but also manage the day-to-day. It's such a complex thing to manage a business because you have to figure out how to both invent and hold true. And never more so is that true than today. The rate of change, as every speaker that has stood up here has talked about, the rate of change is growing, and our ability to keep up with it is daunting, right? Now, as I walk away from the experience of Jobs, which was 20 years ago, one of the things I realized is we need to figure out how to always invent the future, and that means unlearning all the things that we hold as true. Now, Jobs was looking at exactly the same research that I had been looking at, which was that the customer wanted to grow closer to the brand. And I, who was running the channel, was figuring out how to mitigate all that risk, how to do better and better at the thing that we were perfecting, because it was growing the business. And he was looking at the exact same data and saying, how do we run towards the future and not worry so much about preserving today? he was looking around the corner and actually saying, let's go there. And I was trying so hard to hold on to that thing that I had perfected. And how many of us do that in our businesses today? Not because we're very conscious of it, because it feels like that's the right thing. And so the one lesson that I want to pass on is not swearing, although I think it has its place. The Finnish maybe don't think so, no. The one lesson I really hope that all of us get from a presentation or from the lesson of jobs is this. It's never a question of if the change is going to happen, but how do we actually get ready for that change? Now, I've been writing and talking about something I call the social era. Some people call the digital era. Some people call the knowledge economy. Some people call the connected economy. But for a second, when I use the word social, tell me, what do you think of? People. Usually people say media. I love it. So for a minute, do something with me. All 5,500 of you, my goodness. All 5,500. Do something. Act social for a minute. Go. I want a camera so bad now. I want to get all of you waving. Hi. How are you guys doing? Hi, I'm Nilofer. Nice meeting you too. Hannah? That's beautiful. Hi. Yana? Nice to meet you. How's the conference going?
Really great. This is the first time and I'm really happy.
Are you inspired?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Did you
glad.
come today?
I did. I came yesterday. I live in Paris now. Hi. What's your name? All right, so somebody help me. What did you learn? What was that like? What did you do? I got to meet a lot of nice people over here who actually all came up and said hi. 5 different people. They said the conference was going really well and that so far the speech is okay. What else did you hear? What else did you see about each other? What was social like? Warm? Entertaining. What'd you guys do? Anyone? You guys asked questions? You got to know each other? You did marketing to each other? That's great. I love it. That's what networking's about, man. You could have watched this on live stream, but you're here. You might as well make the pitch. What else? You talked about me? Was it all right? All right. Don't make me insecure about making me like self-meta, whatever. Okay. So my point in the exercise was social is, as always, the thing that people really do well. We connect, we listen, we ask questions, we're curious, we shake hands, we make eye contact, we understand what it is to be in relationship with each other. It is the thing that humans actually do deeply well. And anytime we make it about technology, we're missing the point. The best technology we have is idea technology, which is about how we connect together, right? So when I use social, I'm always using it about relationships, and I wanted to just make that point. Plus, I thought it was kind of fun to do. The point of my talk today was then to say, what does success in the social era, the way we've just characterized it, about human beings being deeply connected together, how does success work in modern times? And because my husband is a complete geek, he sometimes makes me translate some super soft topics into equations. Physics major, can't help himself. And so at one point, I was having this conversation with him about, what success looks like. And I said, it's a function, I'm an econ major, it's a function of this thing of talent and purpose and culture. And over the years, I have come back to this equation year over year, kind of perfecting what it means. So what I want to do is walk through the three elements and how they're different in the social era as compared to the old times, and why that matters so much. So to do that, let's first talk about a story of how TED has worked. So TED started out as a conference many years ago, private, small, couple hundred people. It grew to 500 people, then 1,000 people. And at some point they said, as long as we have all these cameras, we might as well share the thing that we're creating. And so they started putting that online. That was probably about 8 years ago. And that went viral. And then they said, and I was in the room when this conversation happened, they said, some of you have been asking if you could run your own events. And we think, sure. But the thought was sort of like this, like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and that you might be able to count them on your fingers and toes. And instead, since then, over 7,000 events have happened around the world. How many of you guys have gone to a TEDx? How many of you guys have watched a TEDx talk? Yeah, there you go. Now you see the impact. And so here's an organization that, with literally 100 people in their corporate office, is figuring out how to share to a group of people, 7,000 big, to organize events. By the way, people are not especially qualified. Most of them don't have editorial takes. Most of them have never run conferences. Most of them don't know anything about producing high-end video. And yet here we are, letting them passionately get involved. And then you see the effect of that many hands that went up, right? 70, 80% of the audience's hands went up just now when I asked how many of you have seen it. It's the opportunity for TED, this little itsy-bitsy organization, to figure out how to create real scale with passionate people. And in doing so, accomplish their mission, which is how to share ideas that matter. And their deep insight was to realize that ideas come from everywhere. And so if they're the only ones curating them, they're only choosing the ones that, they deem appropriate in Vancouver or in Long Beach or New York, but not from Finland or New Zealand or Africa. And in this is a big lesson about what really matters. Because there used to be a time when size, belonging to an organization, was incredibly important for an idea to scale, for an idea to have impact. And so it used to be that you had to belong to a church or government or a big organization. And that still matters for certain types of companies, but not for most. In fact, in almost all cases, it's connectedness that matters, that social thing that we were just doing in person. It's that opportunity then to act less like a gorilla, dominant over its space, and more like gazelles, leaping from opportunity to opportunity. And when I came up with the analogy of gorillas and gazelles, the reason I did is because I had gone to the savannah in Africa and noticed that the gazelles came and looked like they were all disparate. They came in little onesies and twosies, and then they would spread across the savannah. But as soon as there was a threat, they would be able to signal to each other, and they acted like you wouldn't believe. They were the first to respond and get the heck out of Dodge. And so that is what also allows adaptability in the marketplace. We have a lot of organizations today trying to act like, I call it the gorilla in spandex. Is spandex, actually, now that I just thought about it, is that a thing that exists here? That does, right? Spandex. For all you men, that is the stuff that women get into, and it goes, and you stand up a little straighter as a result. So we have organizations trying to act like gazelles by putting on spandex, when really they need to reimagine what it is for them to operate in this new world. Less about being completely in control and more about figuring out how to get a whole bunch of people to be as excited as they are about an idea, to draw on their passion and talent and ideas, and then figure out how to act as one. The shift is that relationships are, to this modern time, what efficiency was to the last era. Relationships. What are relationships built on? Trust. This guy's like, perfect. I don't even know you. Perfect, both times. 2 out of 2. Somebody should give him a book, by the way. Trust. Relationships are built on trust, and trust is about looking at people in the eye and saying, yes, I want to work with you. Yes, I have something in common with you. Yes, we are one. And so then what does that look like in the success equation? So let's just click down on it. What does it look like from talent's perspective? There's a woman here who, when her start of her career, when she was 30, she started working in banking. And she worked in banking long enough where she actually started becoming the office manager and found that her greatest passion in life was actually meeting with people. Because it turns out when people come into the bank, they always come in with a major life issue. Like they're thinking about how to retire, or maybe how to take care of their older parents. So it turns out that the major reason we have conversations with bankers is about life choices. And yet, here's what she was allowed at her organization. She was told you can only meet with people in 15-minute increments. So talk about your whole life, but in a 15-minute increment. And if you don't bring all the right paperwork, we can't finish up that thing. You have to schedule a whole new appointment. And she found herself incredibly frustrated at the things she knew to do well, and her passion, which was to help people really think strategically about the role of money in their life, she wasn't allowed to do. Not as much as she knew was needed. Because she knew if she could solve that person's problem, right, what were they going to do? They were going to go tell the next person, and that would cause growth. But instead, what she was asked to do was creating a marketing plan. A marketing plan for a 12-person organization. She had to write and come up with ideas for what would happen. She had to do a lot of paperwork to do it. And then, in the end of the day, did it really make any difference? So her work became much more about figuring out how to fit into the bureaucracy of the organization and less about the passion and knowledge that she brought. And today, she's now retired, and she gets to do this all the time, and she has people call her from all around Finland to ask her for her advice. And her daughter, Mina, who I met last night for dinner, says to me, her mom is now 10 times more productive than she was when she worked at an organization. Now think about that. The organization, when they were asking her to do a marketing plan, or they were asking her to focus on 15-minute increments, they were trying to figure out how to make her efficient, productive. Were they actually doing that? No. How many of our organizations do that to people? What they're doing in the process is denying the meaning that each of us wants at work. And we do it in the premise or the idea that somehow if we just get you to fit into a particular box, you will be successful and create scale. But it's actually diminishing the thing that each of us actually want to bring into work. There was a time when value creation happened because of the machine. And then there was a time when value creation was about how much we could produce in a particular kind of line. And then there was a time when it was about how much capital could we throw at a problem, because that's what would create scale. And today, what creates value in modern times is ideas. Ideas are born of you, each and every single one of us. And we struggle to find the language for this. Like, talent isn't quite it. And so I ended up coining a term called onlyness, to recognize and celebrate that each of us is standing in a spot in the world only you're standing in, a function of your history and experiences, visions and hopes. And it's from that place where each of us create value. From that place in which we then get connected more deeply in purpose with other people. And this is the thing that most of our organizations don't recognize, because they don't recognize that anyone, quite possibly everyone, has an idea to contribute. We sometimes say, well, that person doesn't have the right job, or looking for, it needs to come from this side of the organization. But as leaders, our job has to be inviting everyone to play. That's where we're going to get all of our ideas. And for those of you that are shy, any of you guys shy or quiet? Right now you're doing it, right? So when any of us sit in rooms and we say, you know, my opinion doesn't count here, I'm going to remind you of this one piece of research and fact, that even if you're wrong, you improve the quality of a team's decision-making by raising your hand. So the next time you have that original idea, that different point of view, a fresh take, know that you're actually helping your entire team by bringing it to the table. Because this is how ideas come and be born, how ideas become bigger with one another. The second aspect is what glues us together. What is the way in which we end up acting, coming together and actually saying, we're part of one team? And to share that story, I want to share a story of a young boy named Ryan. Ryan, when he was 5 years old, joined the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts, you guys have Boy Scouts here, right? I didn't just step on my own. Okay, thank you. And one thing I did not check. So Boy Scouts, he was so incredibly passionate that every year at their annual meeting, he would go and talk to the one person who got their Eagle Scout Award, which is the highest award you can get. Usually about a 14 or 15-year-old would get it. And he would be like, and how did you get it? And what did you do? And can I touch it? He loved the Boy Scouts so much that he would go to sleep in his pajamas, but by lying to his mother and by literally buttoning up the pajamas over his Boy Scout outfit all the way up, thinking his mother did not know this, right? He loved the Boy Scouts. And so when it came time for him to earn his Eagle Scout Award, he had done all of his service projects and shown up in all the ways that he could. And he tries to reach out to the scoutmaster to submit his little paperwork, and he doesn't get a call back. And it happens enough where he gets his dad involved. And his dad says, I'll go meet with him and just make sure everything's good. And the scoutmaster says to Ryan's dad, Ryan came out as gay recently, and so he cannot be an Eagle Scout. It's against the rules. And the dad was, devastated. Imagine having to come home and say this to his son. And he repeated the story that the Cub Scout leader had said, which was, if you had just lied to me, if you had kept secret about your identity, I could give you this award. But you've been public about it, so I can't. And you know what Ryan said? You guys taught me about honor. Why would you now tell me to lie? And so at dinner, some friends were over, and they mentioned this organization called Change.org, which is an online petition site. There's sites like this all around the world now. An online petition site, and the way it works is you kind of say what you want change, and then it sends an email every single time someone else signs up to that petition, to that person. So you never want to really be on the receiving side of a Change.org petition because, your inbox will just be filled, right? So Ryan thinks he might be able to get 50 or maybe 100. He's kind of thinking about his friends and his mom's friends and his dad's friends and stuff. No. He gets 5,000, 10,000. He gets on a big show in the US, the Anderson Cooper show, and it builds and builds and builds until finally the Boy Scouts relent. They have now changed the policies for the Boy Scouts because Ryan was able to find all the other people who were like him. And this is Ryan getting his award. And he's so proud, not just for himself, but because he was able to advocate for so many other people and be able to say the world is no longer about fitting in because we can make the world now suit us instead of always having to deny our truth. This is what purpose looks like, what meaning looks like at scale. And the thing I keep noticing over and over again is how much connected people can now do what once only large organizations could. And they do that not because they're earning money, and not because they're being told to do it, but because they are deeply aligned in purpose. Purpose brings out the best people and the best in people. If we can use this as an organizing principle for our organizations, we will be like rocket ships for growth. And the third piece, culture, is the last one I want to touch on. A friend of mine, well, at the time he wasn't a friend, he's become a friend. I met this guy who was a product manager. I had had lunch with him and been impressed enough with his mobile product management skills, and at the same time, I had been working with a corporate client that needed what looked like the exact same skills. So I did this thing where I got them together and said, that might be a good fit, and then I backed away slowly, because I'm not the recruiting business, I'm not in the matchmaking business, so it was mostly like I'm trying to help you guys out. If it's good, don't bother me again. And it's sort of like setting people up for a blind date. You really don't want to be held responsible for if the date goes well. But both parties call, back to back. The first one, ring, ring. The meeting went great. I asked them all these questions. I so understand their business. I know where I can add value. I totally get that this is a good fit. Next call, VP of Engineering. This guy drove us nuts. He asked us so many questions. We knew none of the answers. We're so humiliated. We never want to talk to him again. And I'm like going, oh my God. Because I'm like, do I call each one back? What would you do, right? So I ended up really thinking about this question because it seemed to me like they were the flip of the same coin, and yet one was seeing it so positively and one was not. So what was the difference? And so I ended up calling back on it and said, okay, so tell me more. And he said, listen, I'm so curious because I just want to make sure there's a good match. And what they kept trying to do is figure out how to put me in a box. Like, did I match the specs? And I called back the VP of Engineering and the head of product management, and I said, could it be that his questions are the right questions? I mean, just think about it. I don't know, because I don't know your business as well as you do. What do you think? And he goes, we've all been having this conversation. His questions were the right questions. And yet, this is the struggle that so many of our organizations face. We have been trained to believe that the way we think about jobs, the way we think about work, is where does that person fit in the organization, or what title do they have, or who do they report to? We do this really classic system of putting people in a box. And yet, of course, no value, nobody's failing because they're not doing what's in their box. They're failing. Almost every business that fails today, every innovation that doesn't happen, every performance that isn't met is because of the gaps between the boxes. Not because anyone's not doing their job, right? And so then why do we keep focusing on, do we have the right people on the bus? And then we say, actually, using the Jim Collins reference, we say, get all the right people on the bus, but then we sort of say to them, can you please sit down, and then using totally inappropriate language again, and shut up, and don't bother us while we drive the bus. But this is causing our fundamental failure. Because what we're actually creating in organizations is what I call an air sandwich, where the top tells the bottom what to do. And all the stuff like a good sandwich, like if you wanted a peanut butter sandwich, you don't want the bread, although the bread's probably good, but you want the peanut butter and jelly stuff. And inside organizations, that is the questions, the debates, the shared understanding, the trade-offs, the opportunity to look each other in the eye and go, yeah, I get what it is we need to go do, right? And this is what we're doing so that then what happens is we leave the room and then we wonder why things don't happen. And we say, oh, they didn't execute well. But actually, what we have not done is created alignment. We have not allowed the stars in the sky to shine. And that's what I think culture really is. It's that invisible stuff that holds all the stars in the sky. That's what allows us to act in concert, and yet we don't know quite how to do that. We create organizational system that lets you check back in with me and you to check back in with me, but then I'm in charge still. I don't really need to be in charge if you're smart go, run the field. So a team I was working with, because one of the things I get a chance now to do is actually to help teams think about this question themselves. A team I was working with actually came up with this analogy. They said, we had been working all day long, and at the end of the day, they said, oh my God, I think I got it. I think I understand why we're failing as a business. They said, we act like the babysitter and not the parent. So how many of you guys have hired a babysitter? Lots. What's a babysitter's job? Somebody help me. What's a babysitter's job? You're going to get this. I know you are. He's laughing. Keep the kid alive. Got it in one. Does the babysitter care whether or not the kid's gotten enough sleep for school the next day? No. Does the babysitter care whether or not the kid had too much sugar and makes them all bouncy? No. You get the point, right? But parents, even parents who hate each other and are in the middle of a divorce, will do a lot of things to make sure they take care of that thing in the common, the kid. They want to make sure the kid goes to college and grows up to be a valuable member of society. They'll make a lot of sacrifices. They'll stay in touch, right? So if that team said to one another, gosh, we're acting a lot like a babysitter and not a parent, what they're actually saying is, we're sort of acting like, it didn't die on my watch, right? And how many of us work on teams where that happens, where you kind of pass it along? Didn't die on my watch, died on yours. And this team was using this analogy to say, you know what? If we're actually going to do this thing together, if this is ours, then we got to actually figure out when we hand off to each other, okay, that kid needs that thing that way. Because we know something about it. We spent time with it. So let's transfer that knowledge. Let's help one another make this thing more successful. And I love the analogy because it seems to me so true about rewards also. So sometimes what we do is babysitter's job, just keep my kid alive, $10 an hour. I want to go on a date with my spouse, right? We don't reward long-term things. And the same is true in businesses. We're not necessarily rewarding people to want to work together. One team I was working with, a big Fortune 500 company, they asked me to figure out how to come in and help reform their entire business so more products came out of their labs and into the marketplace. So spent a couple months, talked to a lot of people, blah, blah, blah. And I came back and I realized that actually every person in the labs was rewarded only if their invention was recognized, like with a little halo around their head. So if a singular person made something, they got rewarded. If a whole bunch of people made something, no one got rewarded. Duh. I'm like, so maybe you should reward the stuff that's bigger because you guys built it together. That's actually what the marketplace needs. And I remember the head of the division, the product team saying, you're right, but we're not going to do that. That company, by the way, just split up recently. So I want to just bring this home and figure out how you might take this out into the world. How do you make this ready for tomorrow, the next day when you go back to work? And I want to just net out the key differences that I've just laid out and then bring it home in terms of what that success equation looks like. The first one is talent is changing in the social era. We have defined talent in the past as credentials. So if you went to the right school, or you had the right degree, or you had the right experiences. And what we're saying now is your inherent onlyness is what's going to allow you to create value. Purpose has largely been about money. If I pay you and you show up and you do these things, that's what will allow us to be aligned. And in truth, it is meaning that allows us to be aligned. And the final piece is we have defined so much of our culture by the routines, budgets and systems and processes, not whether or not we've looked each other in the eye and said, yep, I know what it is we're going to go do. I know what role I need to play on this team to help us be successful. And so then if you bring that back to the success equation, I just want to show you what that looks like. If you have just a little bit of talent, but a lot of purpose, you get one type of performance. If you have a low purpose, but really high talent, you get a certain amount of performance also. But if you start to get a modicum of the two, you start to see something really beautiful happen. And then, of course, we've all been in environments where we have talented people and even pretty good purpose, but the culture kind of brings out the worst in us, makes us smaller than we actually are. And then we've been in environments where it's not bad. And then we've been in environments where it brings out the absolute best of all of us. When it's bigger than the sum of the parts, that is what culture is to each of us now. And so if you kind of bring that back to what my husband would just adore, and so if you guys want to use this back in your equation world, when we use simple math, we can only do so much together. But when you actually recognize the power of culture in bringing out what we can all do together, then you can see some exponential results. So I started this talk with talking about the future and how we have to actually run towards the future and not hide from it, to recognize that it's not that life is not going to change, that change is ever constant, but to figure out how do we adapt. And then to recognize that in this social era, the future is not created, the future is co-created. And thank you today for helping me do that with you.